Welcome to the Wildspire Conversations podcast. You get to be a fly on the wall for my intimate coaching sessions with inspiring entrepreneurs who are changing the world. I'm your host, Stephanie Benedetto Padovani, wild creation coach and soul storyteller at The Awakened Business, where I help coaches, therapists, and creative entrepreneurs craft an irresistible message and broadcast it to the world. In each conversation, I'll ask curious, playful questions, challenging us to connect with the deeper purpose and joy of what we're here to do. We may experience one or more of the following: articulation of their soul's message and mission, life-changing stories, insights, ahas, and wisdom nuggets, ideas for new products, services, or businesses. Truth is, I have no idea exactly what will emerge, because there's no agenda for this conversation. Anything can happen when we step into the unknown of infinite creativity, and that's where we're going to play. It's time to get wild-spired. My guest today is Colin Ryan, an award-winning speaker, coach for speakers, author, comedian, and storyteller. So Colin joins me for an exploration of how humor facilitates deep connection with your audience. It also allows you to grow your business and creates personal transformation for yourself and those you're helping at the same time. Super powerful stuff. When I first spoke to Colin, he talked about two of the biggest miracles in his life being therapy and comedy, and demonstrated such curiosity that I was super excited to have him as a guest on this podcast. So in it, we trade vulnerable stories that have transformed some painful moments in our lives with the gift of humor. So a bit about Colin. Colin has been featured everywhere, from NPR to the Moth Radio Hour and Reader's Digest. Colin has spoken to over 500,000 students and adults across North America to date, and he's been named one of the top 10 college presenters in the United States. Colin is the author of A Comedic Guide to Money, a practical gateway guide to personal finance and our relationship to money, and Unforgettable, a guide to making your next presentation one your audience can't stop thinking about. As a speaker's mentor, Colin is dedicated to helping talented experts become unforgettable ambassadors by finding their voice and sharing their message. If you'd like to deepen your connection with clients and followers and have greater impact in your life and business, you will love this entertaining conversation. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Colin Ryan. Hi, Colin. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm super excited.
Thank you, Stephanie.
So I'm going to ask you the big question. If you could come away from this conversation today with anything that would be really extraordinary for you, what would it be?
I mean, I think for me would just be to, that was a timely alarm.
It was, it's divine.
I think it was. I think for me it would be to, like this, to have a genuine, real conversation with another creative, somebody who wants to, I don't know, just put good ideas and good energy out into the world. And that is what I have tried to do my whole career, and definitely what I've been able to do with my business. And I love it. I have fun. And I want to have a conversation where we talk about having fun.
Cool. So you had mentioned earlier, so I'm weaving this back in a bit unfairly on my part, about the group program that you're doing right now, using humor, like helping people to bring humor into their lives. Mm-hmm. So obviously that's going to make their lives more fun. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, why is that important to you?
Wow. I mean, why is that important to me? Why isn't it? I feel like humor is valuable on so many levels, Stephanie. It is a way to find the best expression of an idea. It's also a way to create this magical connection with even a total stranger. I really believe that when we laugh together, there's magic in that. And I think that when you tell a story that makes people laugh, it's the kind of story that they want to remember and repeat to other people in their life. And all of these things I think are related to our message and our business and our work in the world, right? It's to share our truths the best way we can. It's to make sure that there's magic and joy and play in it, and hopefully to tell a story, that people want to share with others. I
Mm.
think stories really gel us together. And so for me, humor is just kind of this thing that I stumbled into that allowed me to, I don't know, just be in that playground. And I still try to be in that playground as much as I can. And now I want to show other people some of the things I've learned.
Yeah. So tell me about that. So I know that you're bringing this rich background, both your personal life and also your own journey through what humor and in particular comedy and storytelling now have and are doing for you. So what is this is a funny question that's coming to me to ask. Um, what is the story that you're inviting people into with this group program?
I think it's going to be different for every person, but in general, I think what it is to look at your life and at your work in a new way.
Hmm.
And so what I mean by that is when I started doing stand-up comedy, it was a sort of a bucket list act of bravery. And it was, for me, a way to overcome my fear of public speaking, which was really relevant to the fact that my dream in life was to be a professional speaker. And so, those were at odds, clearly.
Yeah.
It's hard to make a living at something that, makes you throw up all over yourself and, not show up. That's kind of the number one rule of speaking, by the way, is you have to show up.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work without you. So I took this comedy class and I was struck by the fact that it felt like I was walking to my death to go to this comedy class. I mean, it really felt like I was dealing with some really big fear. And I think that the fear was the fear of failure and the fear of rejection. I mean, comedy is not like a conversation in the sense that you need to be funny on purpose. And if you're not, people can tell. Like you sort of fail in front of people.
Mm.
And I don't want to spend too much time talking about what's scary about comedy because I think that's fairly straightforward. But what I found is that this silly thing of doing comedy became a way to reckon with my fear of rejection and my fear of failure and to kind of see that they were actually quite small and unimportant and were not worth, blocking me from a bigger life, I guess. So, yeah, I mean, when I went to that comedy class, I told a story about an awkward thing that had happened. If I recall correctly, yeah, I had a.
Are you going to tell the story for me now,
Sure.
Colin?
I had an awkward moment in my life that just always kind of made me laugh, which was I went through airport security and I always had a pen on me. I was always writing ideas down. I was a kid at the time and I had some pens hooked on the end of on my pocket, like sticking out of my pocket. And this big intimidating security guard sort of looks at me and he's telling me, take my shoes off, take my, belt off, all the things. And he looks at me and he says, son, let's go ahead and take those pens off. That is not what I thought he said.
Oh.
And, I was this close to, taking off my pants. I mean, I was enough aware to be like, well, that's okay. I missed it and I got it. And I went through airport security. And then I said to the woman next to me, it's security. Everybody's stressed out. And I said to her, I thought he wanted me to take my pants off. And she just started laughing. in this sort of stressful place, two total strangers. And I don't know. There was something I loved about that. It was just like being genuine, sharing an awkward, embarrassing moment. Like it created this connection. So I'm in this comedy class and I'm telling that joke and people are laughing. And all of a sudden it's like these doors are opening that I never could have guessed, which was, hey, I'm good at something that scares me and that people love. I love communication and I especially love when we can laugh. And so all of a sudden I was on this path and I was doing stand-up comedy. But, as I mentioned, for me, the goal was just to be the best communicator, the best speaker that I could be. So even though I sort of looked like a stand-up comedian or an aspiring comedian, I wasn't. I was an aspiring speaker who wanted to be funny.
Mm.
And so the things that I learned in those comedy clubs, performing for strangers in bars and restaurants and theaters and places where, you sort of have to figure out how to do it, are things that I just want to help speakers and communicators and writers get the
Mm.
most out of. Because it
Mm.
really is it's kind of a sublime thing, I think, when you're, especially in open mic, which is such a weird environment. You have all these people, total strangers in this room. Everybody gets 5 minutes. You can say whatever you want. You just want to get people to laugh and more importantly, to connect with you. And I just find like that's all communication is. I just want you to connect with me. I just want you to remember, what I shared, and I want it to mean something to you. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but it's mainly because I just love talking about humor.
I'm not sure if you did either, because as I'm listening to you, I forget what I asked. I'm along for the ride, so it's perfect. But what I heard in that, so is it okay with you, Colin, if I I had asked you about the story you're inviting people into, and you did answer it. Exactly. That's what I had asked you. Now I remember, because
Okay.
that's what I was hearing in your answer.
Yeah.
So these people are speakers, communicators, writers, people who want to use their voice in some way to connect
Mm-hmm.
and communicate. So what it sounded like to me, the story you're inviting them into is like, hey, there is this thing you want to express, this dream that you have. And in order to do it, it feels like you're walking to your death. There's fear of failure or rejection that's coming up in this all over the place.
Yeah.
And what I'm here to show you is that the most powerful way, one of the most powerful ways I know of to create that connection and that powerful communication and to tell a story that people remember is to walk straight. It's like to walk straight up to it
Yeah.
and see how small those fears are. And
Mm-hmm.
humor is the way we can do this, because it's this sublime experience. I'm weaving in the words that you use, right? It's this sublime experience that allows us to connect over something awkward and scary.
For sure.
And
For sure.
that's how you can get your message out there. That's how you can know that, wow, you can be good at something that scares you. You can be scared of something and be good at it. Like,
Right.
and humor is the way. It's like I don't know what you would call it, the balm or the salve or the thing that lets that happen.
Yeah, I agreed. I mean, the first thing I would say is that simply by going to a comedy class and trying out this thing that scared me, I discovered something about myself I would have never discovered otherwise. And it wasn't until after that I actually read Joseph Campbell, and he has a line where he says, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek."
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, like, isn't that it? I went to this room that scared the crap out of me, and I did this thing that scared me even more. I mean, to be clear, just sitting in the seat in that classroom, I thought, this is as far as I want to go. and then 5 minutes later, they're like, Colin, you're up, and now you're like, oh, no, thank you. That's much scarier, and you just sort of go up there and pretend to be a comedian. And it's sort of awful in a way because it feels so phony. And I think this is true of all of us, is when we start out, we don't necessarily know our voice yet or trust ourselves. And so we try to be whoever we admire. If you're a comedian, you try to be, Jerry Seinfeld, or you try to be George Carlin, or somebody who you think, is edgy in the way you want to be, or is clever in the way you want to be. And you're just like a bad facsimile. And over time, it's like this long journey to realizing you should have just been yourself. Because that's actually what people are interested in. And so that's the first part, is I would want anybody who hears my story, and I have a lot of stories like this in my life, just to know, if there's something that scares you, face into it. Because that's a story no matter what happens. I could have fallen flat on my face. I could have never done comedy again. And it's still a cool story. Or I could have been a presenter for a company for a couple of years and then left to do it as a business like I did 7 years ago. And I could have fallen flat on my face and ran out of money and done something else. And that still would have been a great story.
Yeah.
I think entrepreneurs need to hear this, because I think we have this trap we fall into, which is like, what if I have to go get a job and everybody wonders if I failed, if I failed at being a business owner. It's like, why is that the frame? You had the courage to do something, to be all of the departments of a company by yourself, to work by yourself, to go slowly insane.
We're not so slowly.
Or quickly. Yeah, quickly, right? My first year of being an entrepreneur, I just basically melted down to my dog every day.
Oh.
I was like, Jake, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, man. And he was just like, take me for a walk. It's, don't worry about that. So I just think that's a good reminder, like, you are already brave. And this is just another, there are always more opportunities to lean into your bravery. And then the second part, to answer your question, is I think that humor allows us to convey our message in a universal language. When we choose to use humor, we are authentic, we are relatable, memorable, approachable, unique. I mean, we're all the things that we want our marketing copy or we want our messaging to contain. And again, it's this long journey back to like, just be yourself. Now, just be yourself is very nice and sort of lives on a poster in a elementary school somewhere, I'm sure. So let me add to that. It's smart to work with a coach like you, or a coach like me, or a coach who you feel you resonate with, who can help you find the language and express your ideas and get your message out into the world. Like, your ideas are worth it. Right. So I say that to say, like, be yourself, but be yourself with some guidance and some support. Have people who can help you make the impact you want to make. I'll tell you one more quote I love. And I'm not going to get the words right, but the idea is, many people go to the grave with their song still inside them.
Yeah.
Right. I got a lot of verses I might not have sung yet, and I hope I get to, but I know by facing my fear and by chasing this idea of being a great communicator, really as a way to serve the people around me, like, I've gotten to sing some of that song. And that's what I want for other people. I want them to feel like they can be heard, they can stand out, they can be their authentic self in a way that just sort of brings people to them.
So this is bringing up all kinds of questions for me, Colin. So I see how this worked for you. I see how this, well, the first thing that occurs to me, and I see this in the people I talk to, and I remind myself of it, is that if I have a desire to do something, I am already that.
Hmm.
Like it lives inside of me. That is how it emerges. That is it emerging. In other words, like it's a sign
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what it's going to
I like
look
that.
like. Like, I don't know what it's going to look like. Just like you didn't when you started out. Did you know you'd go into comedy? Did you know that you'd actually become a professional speaker just because you desired it? I mean, we can make up a story. Maybe sometimes you believed you did, but like, could you actually have known? Probably not. And yet that it was taking you somewhere, that inclination, that aspiration, that someday I wish I could be. And the reason that I want to point to that in people is for them to know that you already are, to acknowledge it already happening makes it maybe a little less scary
Mhm.
or a little more, at least for me, it's like, oh, it's taking me somewhere I can trust. Even if it doesn't go, the journey isn't exactly what I think it's going to be. So that's the first thing. I have forever admired the guts of people who go up and do stand-up comedy, right? Holy cow. I mean, a lot of the environments I've seen open mics are often fairly supportive, at least the ones I've been at, but it's still scary, the idea of it. I'm like, this is because part of the fun is almost making, like there's a whole making fun of thing. It's like it's walking that line. Like, how do
Yeah.
you thread that needle? My
Right.
goodness. So when I think about using humor in my business, and I've heard people talk about this on both sides of the fence, like don't try to do it because it's awful if you do it wrong. How do you even address that with people as you're saying, like, what kind of humor are you talking about? Like, obviously we're not talking about stand-up comedy, I don't think, for
We're
most
not.
of us.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you for clarifying that. Yeah. There is a major distinction between comedy and humor. And I'm a fan of comedy and I enjoyed what it brought to my life. I love listening to comedy. But I eventually realized that was not my identity. And the reason, and I'm speaking a little broadly, but I think it's helpful, is that comedy, I mean, it can be mean. Comedy can be mean to others or it can be mean to yourself. All that comedy is, and I think this is true of any communication, is just observing something that most people notice and then taking a look at it and then crafting it into something and then sharing it with an audience and seeing how they react. That's a beautiful process. But when you do something like comedy for a long time, what you discover, because I'm not a mean person outwardly, but can be a very mean person inwardly. I tend to say I don't lash out, I lash in.
Mm.
And so comedy, allowed me to accentuate this self-deprecating voice, my awkwardness, my flaws, my struggles with mental health, my struggles in relationships in a way that wasn't truly authentic. For example, airport story. I've told that story before just to try it out where it actually happened. I actually did take my pants off, which is not true,
Mm-hmm.
but it's actually funnier if I tell you I did,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what's happening? Like the
Yeah.
imperative is almost for me to lie at
Mm.
my own expense because it's an even better funny moment, right? Now I know when you have an awkward moment, people aren't truly laughing at you. They're kind of laughing with you at the situation, but you have to be careful that you don't integrate something that isn't the truth. So that's a long way of saying that comedy is over here and humor is over here. Comedy cuts down, humor lifts up.
Mm.
I look at humor as you finding your unique, authentic voice. It's embracing your weird right? It's geeking out about the things that you geek out about. Like it's really showing up as yourself primarily to enhance your message and to engage your audience. It's a tool. It's a flavoring onto the words you were already going to say. But ultimately, yeah, it's a way to show up as your authentic self, I think. So the challenge, and I think a lot of people might wonder this, is there is no shtick. There's no boilerplate solution to take a person and make them funny. There are just methods and there are formulas and there are tricks, techniques that you can use, always in service to your discovering your own genuine point of view and voice. So, I'd probably be a millionaire if I could tell you, like, I could teach you to be a hilarious speaker in 3 steps. But I'm also honest. And so I wouldn't offer that. But I think what I would offer is that there's a sort of a short journey you can take to figure out, what do I find funny? What do the people around me find funny? How can I use that to bring my message to life, to bring my business to life? And I think that you can. So for me, it's about teaching people to tap into their own humor, to magnify that humor in a way that just lifts people up and lifts your message up. Let's say your message is heavy, or it's high information, or it's very dry. These are all places where humor can bring it to the next level, like can really sort of fix the inherent challenge. So if your message is very heavy, I mean, I'm going to assume most of the time it's also very important. It's an important message that needs to get out there. But do you want your audience to leave crushed by the emotional weight of this content, or do you want them to leave uplifted and motivated and hopeful? I think that's what humor can allow you to send people out the door in a hopeful way.
So it seems to me that humor really comes from, I like what you said, tap into your own humor. Like you can't sell something that you don't believe. You can't express a humor that you don't truly feel yourself. And I think that's why there's a difference in feeling. Trying to think, like some comedians, they're really brilliant and they're good and their act is sharp and cutting, and they talk about things that are funny and not funny. Like I'm really uncomfortable listening to it or watching it. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm laughing. This is horrible.
Sure.
And I think that's comedy, right? Because it's sort of like something about in me says it's not really funny to them. We're just taking something that's painful and laughing about it. And that's why it hurts even while it's funny, versus what you're talking about is something that I've actually lived through that maybe was painful. And now I do see the humor in it, and it's light for me. Like there's a lightness to it. It's not sharp and cutting. Does that line up with what you're saying?
Yeah, it does. So one of the powerful benefits of humor is you start to look at your own life as, in comedy language, material. What is an experience I had and how could I make that experience funny? I had a comedy teacher who said, this is going to change the way you deal with the medical side of your life. Because when you're sitting in the doctor with a scary diagnosis, you're going to think this is going to be a great story later. And I think that that's really important, because you're not doing business with the reality of your life at all. But you're choosing to look at it like, this will be a great story later. And this pain or this fear or this sense of aloneness, these things are actually incredibly universal. So when I tell you a story about, sitting in the doctor's office with a scary diagnosis, the reality is most people are going to connect to that either through their own experience or through, they're just going to relate to it because we are just relating machines. That's just what we are. I mean, machines is not the right word, but I think we are so primed to find connection in other people's stories. So I think that is really, really cool. I mean, you can look at, so I mentioned mental health. I have managed depression and anxiety most of my life. And, in my 20s, I wanted to be a writer. Um, I was sort of an aspiring novelist, but I had this horrible fear of rejection. And so I never let anybody see what I was writing.
Mm.
I don't know if you've ever met a writer like that. They're sort of like
Mm.
always working on something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you ask like, I'd love to read something you're writing. And they're like, oh, it's not done.
Mm-hmm.
And people would say, well, that's okay. Like, when could I read it? And I would be like, never, change the subject. Like, I was so evasive. And, you know, I'd say two things about that. Number one, it's not a good business model. Just to state the obvious. I mean, I would spend hundreds of hours writing these screenplays and novels and things, and I didn't have the guts to share them with anyone because I was afraid of rejection. And number two, I was dealing with a lot of depression at the time. And so a lot of my stories were coincidentally about young men with the weight of their world on their shoulders. I think I may have been writing about me. I mean, who knows? And somebody asked me once, what genre did you write in most of the time? And it occurred to me to say my favorite genre to write in was unsellable.
Oh God.
Like, who wants to read this, right? I mean, it was just so, yeah, I'd listen to sad music and I'd write all these sad things. And, those little jokes, those things that I just shared with you did not come naturally from being a depressed, unfulfilled young adult sort of seeking a way. I felt like a huge failure. But when I did comedy, I realized I could look at that difficult period of my life and say, what's funny about this? And as I tell you those little kind of moments, those observations, there's no pain.
Mm.
I'm laughing too. Like, we're all young at some point, and just like we don't know what's ahead. And the reality is, as we discover, is you never really know what's ahead. Like, that becomes, that's the journey. It's always that way. But I do know that people in like age 26, 27, 28, 29 are often the people who are like, I think I'm wasting my life.
Mm.
Right? Because they see 30 as this, like, I'm supposed to be somewhere at 30 and I didn't get there yet. And they're looking at that one person who got there and who is pretending to be happier than they are, and it's sort of like bad data, and it's a lot of high expectations. And again, I think by embracing the more authentic reality, which is we're all stumbling in the dark, trying to figure out what we're supposed to be doing. And that's okay. Like, that's such a better place to be. There's so much more. I don't know if you feel it, but I feel relief when
Mm-hmm.
somebody sort of shows up, is their messy, genuine self. I think, it's not just me.
Yeah. You know what, it just came to mind, so I'm going to share it. I was working with a coach a couple of years ago, and a lot of times when people meet me, one of the first things they often notice in the feedback I get from my projection is I'm very bright, bubbly, energetic.
Hmm.
And he said to me, I was talking to him about things and I was just being, which is authentically me. It's not all of me, but that is an authentic expression of me.
Mm-hmm.
And he stopped and he's like, all this is really good. Like, you're bright, you're clear, your energy is up. And he's like, what don't you want me to know about you? And I went, oh. And that question just gave me pause. And I started to answer, and what was the thing I came, because I wrote about this. What was it that I came to? Oh, I don't want you to know that I'm ruthless when it comes to getting what I want. And I was like, it was so surprising to hear that come out of my mouth. Why did I tell you that?
I
It
love
was,
that, by the way. Who
it
cares
was,
why? I love that you did.
oh my God. And I was surprised to hear myself say it and to know that it was true. And oh, it was the authentic thing. It's like, and he said, I trust you more now.
Mm-hmm.
That was the very next thing he said. Now I trust you. And I have seen that over and over. When someone looks too good to be true, too shiny and happy and polished,
Right.
I'm like, okay, and show me what's happening underneath there, because I need to see the human side.
Right.
And even the most enlightened individuals have the tinge of anger or sadness and despair, or it's a part of what comes through us as humans. And I think of it that way. It's less me than it is an experience that comes through me sometimes. And it feels really nice and natural to connect with people from that place, because everyone knows it. We all know it. And it gives me permission to go, oh, you too? Me too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel that.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate your honesty. I think that it's refreshing. Now, I mentioned I also have done storytelling, and storytelling is almost primarily about getting yourself to these moments of like true vulnerability. Now, you should be in control of it. This is not therapy en masse. This is not oversharing to a bunch of strangers. In fact, that's a really bad policy. But to have the courage to say something that maybe you've never been able to express to anyone, and to share that with a room of people, I mean, it's powerful. It's meaningful. And I've had the pleasure of having these types of brave moments and saying something. And in that moment, you discover that other people's reaction, that can be your reaction. Right? So when you tell me that you're ruthless, and I go, that's super brave and cool that you're willing to share that, that could be how you look at it. It's like, yeah, I'm this thing I'm not crazy about. I don't know how I feel about it, but it's cool that I'm brave enough to put that out there. And you did. You were like totally willing to show up in that moment and be vulnerable. I mean, I could give you 18 things that I do that I'm not crazy about. I can give you some if you want.
We don't have to do the quid pro quo thing unless you really want to, Colin. If you're
big
really
quid pro quo guy.
It doesn't, the funny thing is that now that doesn't feel like vulnerable anymore.
Right.
Because vulnerability is a feeling. It just feels like, hey, that's real. That's where I'm at, or that's where I was at.
Right.
There are still things that I'm less likely to say. You know what actually really is vulnerable for me now? This is interesting. It's not facts. It's not telling you things I've done or even how I feel, but it's actually letting you see it. It's like not just saying I feel sad or I'm feeling despair, but like letting it show. That feels vulnerable still. That's the feeling of vulnerability, which is interesting. And something that, let me see. So humor, tell me what you think about this, Colin, because I find I don't really think of myself as funny. I've always wished I was funny. And I was business partners with my ex-husband for a long time. And he was always the guy who was the funny one. He was making the jokes and the one-liners and winging them. And sometimes they worked and sometimes they didn't. And you say, Stephanie, you just got to go for it. You never know until you go for it. Mm-hmm. But I was always afraid to do that. So I was more the straight man, but I was goofy as hell, right? Like that was my humor.
Sure.
But I found that what really helps me is actually sharing what I think, like when we can legitimately look at something that we do as humans and see how funny it is. Like, for example,
Hmm.
I need to do my self-care routine because that's how I take care of myself. So if I don't do it, I beat myself up and tell myself I have to do it and I need to do, why didn't you do your self-care routine? Don't you
Right.
know you need to take care of yourself? And isn't that funny? And so something like that might very well come up in a coaching conversation, and
Yeah.
I may, dramatize it a little bit, like, oh yeah, and just beat yourself up some more with that. Now, that could be really mean in the wrong context, but when I'm going, me too, part of our human experience, and then we're laughing at it together at how silly we are, how innocently we punish ourselves,
Sure.
how with such good intention we really want to do the right thing for ourselves, and yet we end up trying to bully ourselves into doing things instead.
I love that. Two thoughts on that. Number one, that's funny because you did a voice. Voices are funny. They just are. You put us in the scene and then it's funnier. So keep doing the voice because I love that.
Yay!
The second thing is that, and I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this, but it's this idea that humor is honesty from a place of self-love.
Hmm.
So yeah, humor is not cutting yourself down. Because something I teach, so I teach this concept called, I call it courageous presenting. Showing up fearlessly, authentically, being brave enough not only to be in the room, but to also be fully present in the room, to go where your audience needs you to go, to be vulnerable so that they feel like they can be vulnerable. All that takes courage. Humor takes courage. Humor, you're taking a risk. What if they don't laugh? But I think what I really believe is that your energy and your values come through in what you say. No matter what you say, like we are, our radar for authenticity is so strong. You know, our radar for lack of a more crass word, inauthenticity is very strong, right? We're immediately kind of assessing, is this person for real or not? Is this person, they say they're glad to be here. Do they really? Are they really glad to be here? You know? Um, so I think that the concept of courageous presenting that I love and that I've got to practice for years is just that, is being willing to show up and to embody the message that you want to share. Now, you can do this when you write, you can do this when you tell stories, you can do this when you send an email. It's just aligning your truth with what you're saying, right? It's, you can't be in conflict. And so to me, humor, when it's done right, if you love yourself, if you love the people that you're speaking to, you can't fail. And I, okay, I don't love puns. It's just one of those things. I don't know if I'm a humor
What?
snob. I know everybody loves puns. I always like cringe a little when somebody does a pun. But if you can do puns or dad jokes or whatever you want to call it, um, and you are truly enjoying yourself, there's no way that I'm not going to not enjoy it. There's too many negatives. I will enjoy it because I love when people love something. And I think we all do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily this thing of like, you need to be at a certain level of proficiency or you have to be totally original or it has to be like, let go of all of that. Just show up joyfully, show up as you uniquely and authentically. There's no way we're not going to love that. So
that that is so beautiful, and I think I want to sit with that. I'm going to say it again so that I can hear it. what you said, the humor is honesty from a place of self-love. I really love that because it feels like being with somebody I care about when we're talking about the hard things, and I know they love me. I know they care about me, and I can just let it, like, we're just being us. There's no pretense. That's what it feels like. And I think what you're pointing to is a way of being first and foremost with yourself, that compassion and love for yourself, and then allowing people to see that in you from that
Mhm.
place of vulnerability. Like, here's my story. Here's where I am with it, and I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
So there might be some stories that I wouldn't tell because I'm not able to do it from that place of self-love yet.
Right.
Right? That wouldn't be funny. That might go into maybe more the comedy or the self-depreciating or the meanness edge, right? Um,
Yeah. Or, on stage therapy, which is a really bad idea. Like you're placing your sort of, you're placing a lot of approval in the hands of a lot of people who did not ask for it and who might just want to be reacting to whether or not what you said was funny or engaging. They're not trying to make a statement about who you are. So yeah, the thing that I always tell presenters, communicators, you can tell any story as long as your audience knows that you are okay.
hmm.
That's the key, because we like, I want the people who I'm listening to be authentic, to be brave, to be vulnerable. I want that. But the minute it seems like they might cry,
Hmm.
I'm concerned about them.
Hmm.
I'm not, I hate you. This is, I can't believe you're crying. It's not that at all. It's that I'm not listening to what you're saying because I'm concerned about your well-being.
Hmm.
So all it is at the end of the day, it's just a distraction from your message. I was
Yeah.
talking to a person today, actually, who just dealt with something very sad in her life. And she was like, do I go to my group about this? Do I share this? I mean, this is kind of relevant to the message that I'm putting out into the world. And I told her that. I said, look, you're allowed to talk about it as soon as your audience knows that you're okay. And so maybe you wait 6 months. Like, you should not talk about things that you have not done business with, like the stage, your website, your email. That's not the place to share and explore that. Do business with it. Get help from professionals, get help from coaches, like friends, loved ones, like work through it, find the gold, and then please share that story, because that story for sure matters to you, which means it matters to me and to anyone who hears it. But you got to wait until you've it is coming from a place of self-love. Right? So I think that's what I'm kind of exploring with you in this conversation, is just be honest, but be honest from a place of self-love. I used to do comedy. I used to pick on myself pretty hard because it got a laugh. But over time, I found that was actually quite detrimental. And I think this is kind of funny in a strange way. As I became more successful in my other life as a speaker, comedy got harder. As I started earning more money and sort of flying and speaking at conferences and like building a career, comedy got a lot harder. Because when you're in a club doing comedy, the rule is we're all suffering. Here's what's funny about how we're suffering. It's very difficult to do jokes about how you're in really good physical health and your relationships are really solid
Oh, poor you.
and your money's together. Like, nobody wants to hear that. So in that way, it's the opposite, I think, of where we are aspirationally in our life. We want to live a more integrated, intact, you know, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Just a life of harmony, of good relationships, of, good social support systems, and habits that pay off. Like that's what we want to do. We want to improve ourselves. And so there becomes a point where self-deprecating humor, actually, you got to be really careful with it. So anyway, I feel like I've said a lot about that, but I think it's really, for me, was a big self-discovery. Was I want to be funny. I don't want to make fun of myself if it's actually how I really feel inside, you know?
I think you've done a really good job of drawing that distinction for me, Colin, in a way that I've never contemplated before.
Mm,
And I see it in your journey, even though I don't know the intimate details of it, where in the beginning, comedy was a way to take the darkness and find, like, at least use it to create a momentary joy.
yeah.
And then as you did that, you realize that's not what I'm really after. I want that inner joy. And that turned maybe like turned toward yourself to find the inner humor, which had the self-love component with the compassion component, and it transformed. And you lost your taste for the comedy. You lost your
Yeah.
taste for that depreciating edge to it,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't mean that it still doesn't have its place. Because if you hadn't gone there, you probably never would have found your way to where you are now and
You're
this
right.
on this healing journey. So wow, that I see that there's so much on offer with what you're doing with people. And we could take it as deep as you want to go. You could say, oh,
Yeah.
well, I'm just going to be a better speaker, which is probably the surface thing that people would come in with.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something much more powerful in walking into your fears that I think is inherent in your story, is enticing, is connective in your own story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. If you want to be a funnier communicator to the public, I can help you do that, and you will make a lot of money as a result. It's just as simple as it is. I have had an unbelievable career because I work really hard at presenting. I know my stuff, and I bring humor and lightness and joy and hope to any presentation I give. And that's where the audience responds. That's where people ask me to go to their event that they have. And that's where people talk to me about a presentation I did 2 years ago, which is so like meaningful. And so on that level, humor will help your business and will help your ability to share your message with the world. Also, humor will help you understand yourself and maybe heal the parts of yourself that maybe you don't even want to think about. There is another way to go. And if nothing else, like having the courage to try something like this, to be a little bit vulnerable, to take a little bit of a risk will pay off. Like this is how great stories are written. Is there is a conflict, right? There is a struggle and the character must overcome the struggle. And if that is traveling to a faraway country, if that is starting your own business, if that is telling jokes to strangers, if that is wanting to just leave the world better than you found it, well, great. Go through struggle to get to it. Like that's how I think differently than I used to. I used to try to avoid pain and stress and difficulty, but now I understand like these are my teachers, right? They're helping me become the person that I want to be. And yeah, I've laughed every day of this journey. My wife is the funniest person I've ever met. She makes me laugh every day. I just love that I feel like I've been able to build a life and a business where I'm interacting with people who want to have a good time, who want to find the silver lining, right? Who want to find their next level. And so, storytelling is a way I help people do that. Building your confidence is a way I help people do that. And I'm really glad I got to talk to you about humor because to me, it's like it's so fun. Like this program that I developed in addition to, working one-on-one, I have this course, and in the course I draw from authors, comedians, speakers, just like examples of their work, and I show you what they did, and like there's a pretty great joke from Brene Brown and I can tell you how she did it. And I can show you how to use that technique for your message. You know, you don't have to be a comedian to demonstrate this great presenting ability, you know? And I think that's one last thing I'll say is, as a speaker, I often was speaking about personal finance, but I would ask my audience, as an example of courage, who in here does not like public speaking? And time and again, it was like 86% of any room I was in, those hands would go up. And so I think I always felt like, I hope I get the opportunity to help people get past that, because what's on the other side is like really, really cool and really fun. And so these courses, this coaching, these are all ways to do that.
That's beautiful, Colin. And I think you're really bringing something that's lighthearted and accessible, as well as really effective to this recipe. So that's very cool. So where can people find you if they want to learn more about what you're up to? Where's the best place to connect with you?
Well, sure. My website is colinryanspeaks.com. And on there, I have a coaching page where I have my humor course, the humor program. I also have a Facebook group. It's called Courageous Presenters. And we talk every day about, presenting, better communicating. We talk about storytelling and humor and vulnerability. It's just a really great time. And yeah, I think, my goal is to meet people where they're at. You might have a specific goal for your public speaking or your presenting that, you're not sure you can move the needle on. Like, let's have a conversation. If I can't help you, which seems unlikely having done this for 10 years, but if I can't help you, then I will help you find the person who can, because I really think that we need more people who are deeply in alignment with the message that they want to share, right? Who want to make the world a better place. And I just want to executive produce for those people. I just want to concert mom, stage mom. I just want to cheer them on, give them some tips and be a little small part of that journey. So yeah, so that's where you would go to my website and reach out if you have any questions or thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you, Colin. That's amazing. And I my spider sense is tingling that you're still on this journey. There's more yet to come, and it feels like that direction. I want to executive produce. There's something about that you're stepping into now. I'm like, woo, that feels good.
Well, thank you. I'm excited. I'm try to always be excited about where it might be going, because I have no idea.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm excited too. Thank you so much for joining me and for sharing this today.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Hey, thanks for joining me for today's Wildspire conversation. If you'd like to receive a weekly Wild Creation email from me filled with more inspiring stories, marketing experiments, playful questions, new podcast episodes, videos and freebies, and anything else I'm playing with, go to theawakenedbusiness.com/wild creation. Until next time, may you know yourself as the gorgeous wild creation you are.